sounding aristocrat. It's very good to be among you and them. Again, ways of praying. How many ways of praying are there? Well, you could say as many as there are people doing the praying, because as individuals, we bring ourselves as individuals before God, and all our interactions with God are conditioned and shaped, aren't they, through the peculiarities of us. I don't know about you, but as I get older, I realise I'm more and more peculiar. So there you go. But there are kind of shapes to it, I think, and there are modes of it, I think, and I would divide it principally perhaps into two. And one would be individual ways of praying, praying ourselves as individuals, and the other would be corporate ways of praying. To divide them up in that kind of way already invites thought, criticism, and questioning. But that's the sort of broad contour, I suppose, that I would want to talk about. My own experience of prayer began like everybody else's, I think, hands together, eyes closed in primary school, in that rather touching way in which children embrace the Almighty, the concept of Almighty, the reality of the Almighty, without so much as breaking a sweat. We don't do hands together, eyes closed anymore. We do more dynamic now, but you know what I mean. So I grew up in a world, I went to a primary school where that was simply part of our everyday experience. Both my parents were Anglicans. My father's no longer with us, my mother still lives. Both members of the Church of England. My father, both of them, all their lives faithful, both of them church wardens at one time or another. My father was of the kind of Anglican generation who didn't really like display of any kind. And I remember once talking to him and I mentioned Jesus, and he winced a little bit. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, Don't get weird." He liked things to be formal. He liked things to be patterned. He liked things to be predictable. And he would come into church and he wanted everything to always be the same. And I used to kind of tease him a bit about that sometimes. But he's onto something there, I think. Perhaps more germane to the discussion later about public ways of praying. But there is something about orderliness and pattern and predictability that tells us something powerful about prayer and what prayer does for us and to us and what we do with it. Individual prayer is, of course, by its nature, a more peculiar kind of thing. On my way here, I was listening in the car to LBC, which is one of my discoveries of recent years. I don't know if you listened to it. It's a great way to get your ginger up first thing in the morning. And Nick Ferrari was leading a very heated discussion about trans rights in the way that LBC does. Fascinating. And as I drove into Lincolnshire, I should have known this because I used to live there, coverage got a bit patchy. So we getting some really fascinating bit of discussion, all of a sudden it completely drop out as I kind of went down a dale or over a hill or something. And then also I'm in the middle of moving house, so I keep getting WhatsApp from the removal people interrupting the broadcast. And so often I think that is descriptive of what individual prayer can be like. Here's a question. What is prayer? Thankfulness, request. Bringing you into the present moment. Anything from the one of nines? Listening. Conversation. Relationship.
Trying to uncover something perhaps you feel is hidden from yourself.
Trying to uncover something perhaps hidden from yourself. This is all good stuff. It's lots of things, isn't it? There are all sorts of ways of describing prayer, all sorts of ways of trying to get a sense of its shape and its contour, its dynamic. The most serviceable definition of prayer, for me, actually comes in the Roman Catechism, which so many things is so good. And as I recall, the Roman Catechism describes prayer as the lifting up of the mind and heart to God. The lifting up of the mind and heart to God. I like that because it's very broad, and everything we've said in that little exchange would fit under that rubric, if you like. But it says something really important, I think. It's about exaltation. It's about us, humans, allowing ourselves to experience and putting ourselves in the dynamic of the exaltation that happens when we put ourselves in the way of God. We have to put ourselves in the way of God. We can't beseech, we can't entreat, we can't negotiate, we know all this stuff. We just have to put ourselves in the way of God. Easy to say that, isn't it? Easy to say the lifting up of the mind and heart of God. But like most things in our lives of faith, the simpler they sound, the more demanding they are. The lifting up of the mind and heart to God. Because so often for me, it is that experience of trying to tune into the radio when I'm driving through areas of patchy coverage. You might think that as a priest, we're at an advantage because we have a particular discipline of prayer that comes with the territory, if you see what I mean. So as priests of the Church of England, we're obliged every day to pray morning and evening, morning prayer and evening prayer. There are different ways of doing that. Some of us have been through a particular kind of training or do it in a particular way. Others might do it in another kind of way. It might be said that in the difficulties and rigours and demands of everyday pastoral parish life, that it's rather advisory rather than compulsory, you might say. But it is a discipline that we uphold. What does that mean? Well, we have set forms of prayer. We all know about that. We come to church on a Sunday. We kind of know what we're going to get. And even now, when church has grown fainter in more and more people's lives, if you start saying, Our Father who art in heaven, there will be a rumble as people kind of jump onto that because they recognise those words. Amazing how powerful they are. I was called to a deathbed a while ago and dealt with that. I was in hospital. And somebody else was also dying, and the nurse asked me if I would go and see this person. It was an older gentleman, a Polish gentleman, who was at the end of his life. And he was in and out of lucidity. So I started saying the Lord's Prayer, but then it occurred to me that because of his age and his origin, he would probably grown up with the Latin liturgy as a Roman Catholic formed before Vatican II. And because I was fortunate enough to go to a theological college where occasionally scraps of Latin were used, I could remember the Lord's Prayer in Latin. So I said, I was going to say it in Greek then, Our Father who art in heaven, Pater noster qui es in caelo. And his lips began to move, because even though he was on morphine at the end of his life, so deeply imprinted into him, that just hearing those Latin phrases, even with my terrible pronunciation, began to get that circuit fired up, and things began to move again. Unfortunately, I can remember half of the Lord's Prayer in Latin, but he remembered it, so I just kind of mumbled along in the way we do. And we got to the end, and that was okay. But it's really the tuning in, isn't it? So there's your set patterns of prayer, and that's all well and good. But the individual thing is a bit different, I think. Public worship is about joining with other people and with them rehearsing those familiar words and phrases and patterns. We'll get into that. The private thing is a bit more interesting. For me, the way it works, it might be different for you, but this is the way it works for me, is I begin every day in silence. Well, as much silence as two grumpy dachshunds will allow, but anyway, theoretically in silence. And actually that's not strictly true. I begin every day with the Today programme, just to get a sense of where we are in the world. But then I switch that off. And I'm fortunate to have a place where I can pray in my vicarage. And I have a yoga mat. Don't worry, there's no yoga mat that you'll find in vicarage, but it's just handy on my knees. I have a yoga mat and then a little prayer stool. You have them in the chapel here. And I tuck that under my bum and I kneel as far as my knees will allow. And then I use a thing called a metanoi, which is, Edna went to a college where we were joined by monks and priests from Romania. There's a relationship between our college and their college. And in Romania, there's a tradition of the metanoi, and it means a turning. Metanoia is the Greek phrase that is, you can find that everywhere in church narrative. But it's a knotted cord. So many you see devices like that, don't you, for people to practice their disciplines of prayer. You're going to do the Greek culture, Orthodox culture, Western culture, the rosary, you'll find it in Buddhist practice, Hindu practice, whatever it might be. And there are these beads upon which you tell the prayers necessary to get you to the place you want to be. So it's a knotted cord with beads or knots in it, and you go around each knot and you say a prayer on each knot, and when you get to the cross you say another prayer, whatever pattern you choose. I like the Orthodox habit, which is the Jesus prayer. So on every knot, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's useful prep for a priest and the day ahead. Useful prep for any Christian, I'd say, and the day ahead. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Not. And Our Father, perhaps, in between, when appropriate, to Gloria as well. The point is, I think, an interesting one, is to be in silence, first of all. So this isn't spoken out loud, this is in this sort of out loud, it's in your head. But you just go around and you'll find that what that does to you is it produces a kind of pulse. And once you get into that pulse begins to affect you. It engineers back into you something you need. And all this is about just opening yourself up to the God frequency. We live in a world full of conflicting claims on our attention. And it's like spinning the dial on an old radio. Remember, you would get sort of Hilversum or Arcos, all those little places on the shortwave frequencies. Hiss and crackle, and you dial your way through, and eventually you get Radio Luxembourg, in its case, whatever it was. And you would finally lock onto that signal that would come through loud and clear. It's kind of the same, I think, when you're praying. You need to find the signal, and you need to do that by taking your attention away from all those other things which crowd in on it. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Just from the pulse of that, your breathing will slow down. I've just been on making a documentary at the moment about bereavement for Channel 4 before they set it off. And I was on a widow's retreat in the Isle of Bute in the west of Scotland. And there we had yoga every morning. I'm not really built for yoga, I think it would be fair to say. And my cat was not very cat-like at all, it was more walrus, I think. But I was very struck that we began every session just by getting our breathing regular and deep and proper. So you just begin to get that. And you can feel your body relax, and you can feel, once again, your ears begin to open up to the sound you need to tune into. What's that sound? Well, for some people, literally, it's the voice of God. I spend quite a lot of time with people in psychiatric care, in inpatients, and quite often those people are very often tuned into the voice of God. Literally, we're very keen to share with you what God has had to share with them. There's another story, a friend of mine, who was a vicar, who had a psychiatric unit in his parish. He used to go in very regularly. And one of the parishioners there said he was God, not just tuned into the voice of God, but was God. And he would go on about this rather a lot to my friend, who got a bit impatient with it. One day, so impatient, he said to him, "Listen, if you are God, maybe you'd settle something for me once and for all." And the man said, "Yes, of course, it isn't." He said, "What is the precise nature of the hypostatic union of the three persons of the Trinity?" And the man looked at him and he said, "I never talk shop." Some people, you will know, in pastoral encounters, whom the rest of the world might dismiss as delusional or psychotic or strange, sometimes really do seem to have a hotline to the Almighty. And you think about in the days when Christian culture was more settled and more confident, they were given an honoured place. I was thinking about this a lot recently, looking at you, I'm sure that, for me, those extraordinary pictures of President Putin in the marble palace of the Kremlin, at one end of a huge table about 40 feet away that people is meant to be talking to. You see this massive distance, don't you, between Putin and everyone else, isn't it? Those nearest to him can come no nearer than 20 feet away. And that is recapitulating, isn't it, a kind of czarist model of leadership. It reminded me of Ivan the Terrible, who, Putin was a piece of work. Ivan the Terrible was truly indeed a piece of work. But Ivan the Terrible had holy fool. A person who, if we encountered them today, would most likely be sectioned and put into inpatient care in a psychiatric unit. Someone who had the voice of God in his ear. Someone who he dressed in rags, he lived by begging, he was tormented by people, he was a beggar, a mendicant. But people recognised in him something authentic, something connected to the voice of God, to the point that he was the only person who Ivan the Terrible would hear the bad news from. Remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The only person who could whisper that into the ear of the Tsar. Incredible bravery to do that, isn't it? To the point where when he died, Ivan the Terrible was one of the pallbearers at his funeral, an act of humility and an acknowledgement that it would be hard to see President Putin do. But there you are. So sometimes the voice of God can come to us in surprising ways. It happens all the time, I find, when we encounter people. But you need to know what it is. It needs to be. And this is another reason why this private prayer thing is so important. If you can find yourselves half an hour in the morning and in the evening, ideally, where you can just be on your own or with somebody else, in silence, get into some sort of pattern of repeating a prayer, get into that pattern of your breathing changing, put yourself in the way of God, offer up your mind and heart to God, and extraordinary things happen. The discipline, being a disciple, is about being disciplined, is really important. I think that repeating pattern, so that gradually, metanoi, degree by degree, we turn away from the frequencies of the world and tune into the frequency of God. Lock onto the signal if you can. It's elusive, and you won't always be able to do it, but the discipline will enable you to do it even when you don't think you are. What is the point of prayer? What comes back? Some people, I'm very struck by how often people, especially if they're facing a particularly tricky decision, will pray about it. And very often, after they've prayed about it, God will tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. If you are praying and God tells you exactly what you wanted to hear, I don't think that's God, actually. I think very often we send that ping out, don't we? And what comes back is just a reflection of ourselves. My experience is that when you are in the God frequency, what comes back is not what you think you're going to get. And I think that's a really interesting and important thing. I've found in my own life, I've sometimes, I was talking about this a while ago, that when my parish before finding where I've been for 11 years was the gritty inner city parish of St Paul's Knightsbridge, London SW1, parking, nightmare. A nice job. It was a church that was amply resourced, 5 clergy, 7 staff, professional choir, director of music, organ, the whole works, you know. And we did lots of lovely memorial services and posh weddings and that kind of thing. We were right in the middle of Belgravia, never had to worry about where we were going to find the resources to do the things we needed to do. And I think for lots of clergy, that might sound like a very enviable place to be. Of course, what you have to do there is what you have to do here, what you do anywhere, which is get alongside people and walk with them as we try to discover God in their lives. So that can be actually harder to do with people who have plenty than it is with people who don't have much. But people would look at it and think, enviable job. I was curate then, it was time for me to become an incumbent. And the neighbouring gritty inner city parish of the Grosvenor Chapel Mayfair fell vacant. And I thought that might suit me very nicely. It wasn't a ruinously punishing schedule of services. It was handy for the BBC and for Marks and Spencer's, everything you could possibly want. And I went to see them, and they seemed to like me, and I liked them, and the bishop and the archdeacon seemed to think that might be a sensible place to go after being curate at St Paul's Knightsbridge. And then I did that very, very dangerous thing. I opened the Church Times and found in the clerical situations vacant column an advertisement for a priest in charge for St Mary the Virgin, Findon, in the Diocese of Peterborough. Well, I knew the church, I'd grown up around there, and in another life, maybe that clear sense about what I would be doing in my next steps in ministry. But have you ever had that sort of back squeak moment where something, you can't quite tell it because it's too obscure or too high or too low for your normal range of hearing, something just squeaks or rumbles and you think, something here I need to pay attention to. Thought no more about it. But the squeak didn't go away. And in the end I thought, well, seeing I'm about to move on to a new parish, it might be an idea just to have a sort of dry run at the process of getting an appointment. So it was a nice place. So on the last day I could apply for details. I did, and the parish profile arrived. And I was experienced enough by then to be able to read a parish profile and understand what they weren't saying rather than what they were saying. I could hear some people from PCCs acknowledge that. And so I applied, and then I was asked to come up for an interview. I thought, okay. Half-time post, reading between the lines, you could tell that that parish had struggled, and there'd been some difficult times. But I thought, okay. So I went up, knew the church, nice people, went down the parish, and yes, church primary school, it's a cricket club, very nice. But not for me. And then we had the interview, and at the end the bishop said, if we were to offer you the job, what would you say? And I opened my mouth to say, I'd like to think about it. But I said yes, instead. It's just in that moment I knew that this was something I had to say yes to. Now, it wasn't a parish that I would have, if I had a list of things I would want my next parish to be, it wasn't any of them at all, actually. It was in a place I didn't particularly want to go. It was a profile that didn't particularly match mine. And it did not offer me the opportunities that I thought the parish I was going to go to would offer me. But I just knew at that moment that it was for me. And the reason was that what came back when I prayed about it was that unsettling, unforeseen crackle, squeak, rumble that tells you that this is the thing you need to pay attention to. So, 59th Vicar of Feynman. I got back to London. I remember I bumped into a friend of mine who was a very glamorous priest at St Paul's Cathedral. And he said, oh, I hear you're going to the Grosvenor Chapel Mayfair. And I said, no. He said, oh, where are you going? And I said, St Mary the Virgin Findon, the Diocese of Peterborough. And he said, what did the bishop catch you doing? There are hallmarks, I think, if you are tuning into that God frequency. What comes back is not what you expected, that's a good thing. But also, what comes back requires of you things you don't want to do. It wants you to go to somewhere you don't want to go, and it wants you to give things you don't want to give. Sacrifice, I think, is a hallmark of what God calls us to do. Easy to say, isn't it? Much, much harder to get to grips with the reality of that. And the way you do that, I think, is by that daily discipline of just shutting up. In my case, that's quite a tough discipline. And just tuning into that God frequency. Now, we have busy lives, don't we? We all do. You're in your work, perhaps, you have your family commitments, whatever it might be. And quite often people say to me when we talk about prayer, that they pray when they walk the dog, or do the washing up, or whatever it might be. And those are all valuable things to do, and I would very much encourage people to pray whenever they can, whatever they do, but I think we can do better than that. Prayer is not something we do while we're doing something more interesting. It's not like listening to the radio while we do the ironing. How important is it to tune in to the God frequency? There's nothing more important. So if you can just create some time in your day, half an hour, maybe another half hour in the evening, well, that's fantastic if you can do that. And the reason that's great is not simply because exciting things happen, but because we grow in that relationship with God. And one of the hallmarks of that, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was saying that the job of the priest is It's the job of every Christian, actually. As St. John the Baptist says, I must decrease, that he may increase. I've just come to the end of my time. I'm finally come to retirement, so people are being really nice to me at the moment. It looks like almost hearing the eulogies at your own funeral. The people are saying how much they love and appreciate what I've done, da, 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 da. And it's all very nice, but the truth is, anything useful I've done in ministry has really been by getting out of the way. Partly that's to allow other people to bring their gifts to whatever we do, of imagination and creativity and experience and commitment. And partly it's simply because we have to be the agent of one who is greater than us. Now, for someone who's not exactly shy in the spotlight like me, one of the toughest disciplines for me has been accepting and understanding that. And I was talking to this person, I was saying, the sort of necessary hallmarks of priesthood, certainly, is self-effacement. And she said, do you remember when you came down on a cloud, dressed in white, to the Eurythmics, playing a harp to land on the floor at Strictly Come Dancing? And I said, yes. And she said, not many people were thinking, how self-effacing. Of course, mea culpa, which is exactly right. But God uses us as we are, with all our peculiarities and our brokenness and our cracks and our grain and our grit and our glitter sometimes, to do the things that God wants us to do. But you do have to remember that we are here to be the hands and the feet and the words and the deeds of the one we serve, and the necessary self-effacement comes up. It's related to tuning into the signal. One of the inheritances of my life, because of my extremely checkered career in pop music a long time ago, is bilateral tinnitus. Pop music being famously an enterprise which will shred your hearing. So quite a lot of the time now, well, in fact almost all the time now, I don't know if anyone here has tinnitus, put up your hand if you have. It's not at home. Well, you will know what it's like to have a sort of perpetual whistle or a whine, sometimes a rumble, in what feels like your ear. It's actually sort of in your brain, I think, rather than in your ear. But it is a burden to carry, actually. Mine came on quite dramatically. I mean, it had been sort of bubbling under. But I was taken by an old school friend to a ring cycle at Bayreuth in Germany, something I've always wanted to go for years and years, a great lover of the music dramas of Wagner. And trying to get a ticket, it's easier to get into Wimbledon men's final than it is to get a ticket for Wagner in Bayreuth. But anyway, this friend of mine got me a ticket. And my ears popped on the plane we flew to Nuremberg, I think it was. And when I arrived in Nuremberg, I realised that the whistle in my ear had just greatly intensified in volume and intensity. Now, I'm a musician originally, and I could tell that although it's not one single tone, the whistle in my right ear is around the note of B. The ring cycle begins with a very, very long passage in E flat, which is about as remote from B as you could possibly get. So after a lifetime of wanting to go to Bayreuth, a huge journey, I sat there in the Festspiel house, and the orchestra started up with a great piece of music in E flat, and all I could hear was a completely discordant whistle in my ear in the wrong key, and I can remember gritting my teeth and thinking, right. But anyway, what I've learned from tinnitus is to concentrate and is to find a way through it. There are other ways you can do, of course, hearing aids, that's another one. But I realised that to listen to music, what I needed to do was to find a way to listen through the tinnitus so I could connect to the music. And in lots of ways, it's been really good for me, because it's made me rediscover the music and think about it again. You can see where this is going. This is another metaphor, if you like, for a method of getting through to the God frequency. Listen through the tinnitus. The tinnitus is the hiss, the static, the crackle of the everyday stuff. A ridiculous thing yesterday. I was in Uppingham yesterday, and I went to the Co-op to buy my supper. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a piece of steak, so it was on offer. So I bought a piece of steak, but steak now being such a nickable product from supermarkets, it came encased in a sort of plastic case. like a CD, except a steak rather than a CD. So absent-mindedly, I filled my basket, and I went to the self-service till to check out, and then realised I had the steak thing. And I thought, ooh, how does this work? So I rang it through and it read the barcode, and then, so what do I do? So I took it over to the young woman who was on the tills, the man tills, person to tills, and said, what do I do? And she kind of looked at me and she said, well, you ring it through. I went, okay, so I went back to it. And I just didn't understand what I was doing. So I said, can you take it out of the case? And she said, yeah, but ring it through first. And I said, well, it won't go through. And then she sort of went, and she opened the case and sort of slapped the steak down on the counter. And I went, oh, sorry. And then in the car on the way home, I thought, she spoke to me like I was stupid. And I'm not stupid. I just don't understand how their system works. And it started to sort of gnaw at me a little bit. And by the time I went to bed, I realised it had been on my mind all afternoon. And I was thinking, well, I should have said something to her. I should have said, young lady, your customer service is not up to par. You didn't know. It was nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. But it had just begun to niggle me. Why did it begin to niggle me? Because it made me feel that I was stupid or incompetent or failing in some way. And that kind of bothered me and bothered me. But that's exactly the sort of thing you need to tune out of. When I was at Boston Stump, I remember I was going to the prayer board, and what I do on Maundy Thursdays, I take down any prayers on the prayer board during the vigil, I pray them. One of the priest's jobs to do that, to pray the prayers of the people. And the one I really remember was one which said, Dear God, I pray for Margaret. I pray for Margaret that she might not turn up into the bitter old lonely woman she's definitely going to be if she doesn't improve her thing. And it was very interesting to see that there was somebody who was obviously working out some kind of personal animus towards poor old Margaret. That's not what we're meant to be doing. What we're meant to be doing is tuning out of ourselves and tuning into God. A simple thing to say, a very difficult thing to do. The other method I use, and again this is because I spent a lot of time around Romanian monks, is the use of icons. Now in the Western Church, that's not something that we've particularly embraced. It doesn't really sit neatly into Western theology for all kinds of complicated theological and liturgical and doctrinal reasons. But lately I think you see it far more often. You go to lots of churches and you'll see icons. Now an icon is a picture of Christ or a saint, whatever it might be. Sometimes lots of saints. Sometimes events from the life of Christ. And you can look at them, and that might be a nourishing thing to do, as you might look at any work of art. But the icon is something a bit different from that. An icon is both a surface and a window. So you look at it, and you see a saint or a story from the New Testament illustrated. But it's also a window. It lets you through. Their eye rests on the surface, obviously, and often they're done with gold and shiny surface. But you also go through. They're windows into the reality that exists beyond this world. It's a sort of visual accompaniment to what I was talking about the hearing thing. Just as we must tune our hearing to get through the hiss and the crackling and the static to lock onto the frequency, so we must also tune our eyes so we can see through, see beyond the horizon of this world into where the tantalizing hope and prospect of the world beyond exists. Such an important thing. So an icon, a candle, the metanoia, the pattern breathing, the dedicated time. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I was at St. Theological College as Father Ed, which is an Anglican monastery in Yorkshire. Perhaps if you say Anglican monastery in Yorkshire, you're thinking of Rievaulx Abbey, or I don't know, Fountains, this wonderful medieval building in a sun-dappled valley with a river trickling through it, and serene figures with cows walking around singing. It's actually between the M62 and the chemical plant, so not quite the touristic version you might think. And as for serenity and floating around, monasteries are laboratories of the reality of humanity. 24/7, locked in with people you wouldn't have chosen to be with had you not been called to do this thing. And that's tough, actually. And we all each had a spiritual director. Father Eric, in my case, who died last year, the lovely guy. And I can remember after I'd been there for about a month or two, going to see him. He said, "You all right?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I'm just really, really struggling." He said, "What are you struggling over?" I said, "It's the other people." And he said, "What's wrong with them?" And I said, "Well, you know, they're not serious, they're not devout, they're not proper Christians, they don't pray faithfully, they don't keep the rules, they don't do this, they don't do this." And then he said, "Go on." And I said, "I'm not as nice as I thought I was." And he said, "That's good." And it was the beginning of wisdom. Again, this stripping away of the nonsense in which we dress ourselves, our motley, our glad rags, the version that we want to pretend, the version we want to present to the world, so that the flattering reflection is returned. That's not what we want to see, because it's not what God sees. God sees us as we are. And as C.S. Lewis said, I think it's C.S. Lewis, he said, that purgatory would be the experience of knowing ourselves as God sees us and the world sees us. Well, you've got to get used to that, and that takes a bit of discipline too. Don't look for reflections. Look for windows. Look through. Look to the horizon beyond. And there's kind of strange moments. Still happens sometimes. You think being an official representative of a religion, being a religious functionary, is a bit like being a host at a party sometimes. So you're so busy doing the vol au vents and pouring drinks that you forget to have a good time yourself, because your job is to make it happen for other people. And sometimes ministry, ordained lay ministry, can be a little bit like that too, because you're so anxious to create optimum situations for others to have what they need to have. You kind of miss out on it yourself. But you need to find the time. You need to tune in. Every once in a while, something quite marvellous will happen. I was out on my bike. It was in the autumn. And me on a bicycle is not an attractive sight, I have to say. It is not Chris Boardman in Lycra powering along in a yellow jersey. Nothing like that at all. But it was one of those bright, cold days of autumn, late autumn. And I was cycling along one of the roads through the country near where I live. And I was in rhythm. I was just that kind of sweet spot you get if you are cycling, even if you are an elderly overweight cyclist. And I saw out of the corner of my eye the sun lit a bush. And it was standing in a hedge. And it was something that didn't belong to the hedge. And the hedge, the leaves had withered and browned and gone. But this was a late falling leaf. And it was intense orange, and the sun caught it, and the wind blew it, and the leaves flickered and caught the light. And of course it was the burning bush. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the burning bush, and I just remembered. I am who I am. You know, that story. And you realise that sometimes out of the corner of your eye, or the thing half heard, is where you're going to get the information that you need to see and hear. It begins, I think, with silence. Such a difficult commodity to get your hands on, because the world is full of noise, isn't it? But if you can begin in silence, find some silence, get your breathing into a pattern, maybe use something, a mantra, I guess, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, sinner. Maybe concentrate on an icon, or kind of like whatever works for you, a cross perhaps. Just begin to allow the hiss, the static, the crackle, the shadow to fade, and to tune to the reality of God, which is awaiting us. I've gone, sorry. Lots of quiet time is coming. Thank you.
wishing to permeate too much this wonderful atmosphere that's now upon us. The house is open. I'm going to dash ahead, light all the fires. Tea and coffee available there. If you could put your empties over on the table and your biscuit wrappers in